There's just this push and pull throughout the whole movie that's making you question, is the man inherently good or is he inherently evil? Or is there a mixture of something in between?
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of A Lost Plot, the podcast by storytellers for storytellers so we can tell better stories ourselves. As always, I'm your host, Maverick, and today we are coming back with one of our favorites, Andrew Reeder, reviewing the second installment in the Dark Knight trilogy, The Dark Knight, the 2008 superhero film with the screenplay by Jonathan Nolan and Christopher Nolan. And it's a absolute legendary film. It's in the Library of Congress and the preservation of the National Film Registry, so it's kind of a big deal to a lot of people. So we had to review it eventually, and that's what we're doing today. What is your initial thoughts, just overall impressions of this film, Andrew?
Uh, I think this film, the end of the day, when you're asking questions about it, it is a question about what is the nature of man. And I think there are multiple different views that come out of this. And I think it's very interesting because I don't think the director Nolan gives us a clear answer as to this by the end of the movie. And it ends up being more thought-provoking for the audience, which is something different, but it's something I also really appreciate about it.
Yeah, I know that Nolan has a tendency to be more philosophical. I thought it was interesting, especially comparing this one to the previous film, right? Because the previous film is very deep in regards to the themes and elements that are portrayed throughout the film, almost to excess, I would say, especially contrasting it and thinking about it in light of this film. Whereas this film has not as many themes, but it delves very deep into each of those themes and does it very well. So, yeah, very interesting. I also think that there was a sense in which the characters in this film more closely aligned around a contrast with Bruce Wayne or Batman compared to the previous one, which I hadn't really thought about until I had really, tried to get more philosophical about this film. I don't know. I think there is a tendency sometimes to overanalyze things, but I think that the messages in this film are pretty strong and they're there for a reason. And it wasn't completely intentional. Christopher Nolan is very intentional about the themes and elements he portrays in all of his films. He tries to make them thought provoking, and you see that in this one. So I think it'll be a good discussion. But before we get into the deep discussion, Andrew, what is a summary of the film, and then we'll talk about what our overall rating of it is.
Well, I would summarize this one on its own, but since it is a sequel, it's important to note a few things. This time we get a Gotham City and a Batman that have been well established by now, and there's several key points in the movie towards the beginning where this is set up. And as the movie progresses, you have instances where Batman is confronted now with different challenges than before. You see he has some new allies. They've established themselves as well. And they're confronted with new challenges throughout the movie, such as the Joker, and then questions about whether their morality is challenged throughout this entire movie. Um, their steel, if you will. And this movie is more about a testing of the characters. And so as the movie progresses, you have things like the Joker and the mob, and even the own characters testing themselves. So you have Harvey Dent being the DA. Jim Gordon ends up being promoted. Rachel Dawes ends up dying. Big spoiler. Sorry, we shouldn't have been here if you didn't want it. Um, and ultimately, Batman beats the Joker, or does he? Because that's the question. What does it mean to beat the Joker?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that's a brief summary, and we'll get into the details as we go.
Yeah, and there's definitely very dynamic elements to each of those pieces that he discussed. So there's a sense in which each one has to be taken in its own right and kind of wrestled with and grasped rather than trying to just do a broad brush stroke of the entire thing. So we'll try to do it justice this time. The film starts out quite differently than the first one. The first one, you kind of get that arc of starting out with Batman, who he is, his origin, and kind of those flashbacks showing how he interacted with Ra's al Ghul and how he became this great fighter and all of this stuff, right? In this one, instead, they jump right into the action where you have the bank heist and the people in the clown masks trying to steal from this bank, which you find out is dealing with the underground of Gotham City, helping the evil crime lords to stow away their cash, more or less. Um, in that you have multiple characters die, and then you have the Joker revealed at the end of that. What was your impression of introducing us to this new film?
I really like the opener.
Mm-hmm.
I will also say, just while we're talking about the opener, this Batman movie felt very different than the first one. Like just the overall setting and the way that characters are portrayed and just the feel of the movie overall was very, very different. Because the first one's an origin story. It's very much a oh, this is Batman. He's fighting bad guys. These are several of his villains. Um, and this one had a much darker tone to it, hence, the Dark Knight. But
Right.
I did like the opener. I thought it was very clever. Uh, you kind of see the clowns, you're not really sure what's going on. I've seen this movie probably like a dozen times at this point, so I had to think about this like from a first time viewer's perspective.
Right.
Um, and like I mean, you don't know what's going on. There's a bank robbery going on, and then all of a sudden there's a bus, and they're all clowns, and they're slowly taking each other out, and you're kind of like wondering, all right, so at a certain point you get to where you're like, okay, one of these is going to be the boss, or one of these is going to come out on top, um, and then it's the Joker. Like as soon as he takes off the clown mask, you're like, ah, yes, I know who
Yeah.
that is,
Yeah.
which I think is a great way to reveal him too. Um, I really like we're going to talk about Heath Ledger's Joker, but I do like,
Of
I
course.
want to say, when he does take off the mask, you can still recognize him, but it's still a different looking Joker. Like Heath Ledger's Joker is a very dark looking Joker, with the way they do the makeup, the hair, the
Hmm.
costume. And I think it very much fits Christopher Nolan's theme. But yeah, for the opener, I gave this one almost full points, pretty much.
Yeah. Same. I mean, I think that the Joker is the main new element in this film, right, compared to the previous ones. So rather than trying to do some large expose, atypically you have in superhero movies today. I mean, even past this, where they, well, never mind. In regards to movies today, oftentimes you have this montage of the superhero team is back and this is them fighting some enemy and they're so good at fighting it, maybe they say a few jokes, blah blah blah. In this one instead you get, okay, we already know who Batman is, we already know who Alfred is, we already know all of these other things, right? Lucius Fox, Rachel Dawes, blah blah blah. So let's introduce the new characters first, and that what they start off with is the enemy, and they really cement him well from the start, not just because, okay, you see all the chaos with even a bus coming through the wall. What on earth is a bus doing as their getaway plan? And then you see how well it plays out when the bus drives out with the rest of the buses off to schools, right, to take kids to their different schools. Anyways, um, but also you see that in how the chaos of the entire situation. People are dying, they're killing each other, and then at the end, he ends with that great twist on the phrase "what doesn't kill you makes you stronger." Instead, he says "what doesn't
Yes.
kill you makes you stranger." Right, and that sets you off for the entire feel and theme of the villain, where he's not. Right, it kind of provides a contrast where the original phrase, right, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, is this idea that you go through hard times and become a better man or woman because of it. But in this case, he's providing that contrast, which does actually occur in life where if you if you go through a hard situation and you don't become stronger because of it, what does it do? It cripples you, it scars you, it leaves you with some bad taste in your mouth that you carry with you for the rest of your life. And that's the setting that you get for almost the contrast of the movie going forward, where this chaos, the evil in life, when you're set up with hard situations, which is what the Joker continues to try to do for the rest of the film, how does society, how do people, how does Batman, how does everyone react to that? Does it make them better? Does it make them worse? And that's a question that's continually posed in situation after situation here. So it's crazy that even in the first scenes, when you're not even really thinking about it, Christopher Nolan plants that idea in your mind of this is what the movie's about, right? And how are you going to react to that?
I mean, there's a line that's quoted throughout the whole movie. It's you either die a hero or live long enough to
Hmm.
see yourself become the villain, which is
Right.
it's kind of a different twist. It's this idea that the longer you live, the more deformed and messed up you get, which is Joker's whole philosophy, which we'll tackle, which is combated by Batman's and everyone else's throughout the movie. And ultimately, the
Hmm.
question becomes which one is the right philosophy. And I don't think they give you quite an exact answer on this if you're really paying attention to how the movie plays out.
Interesting. I am curious about that. Oh, we didn't even get to our ratings. I just realized that. What are we doing?
Oh, I
What
have a
would you
rating.
give this?
I have a
Yeah.
rating. I did
What
your
is it?
9 points.
Uh huh.
I want to know. I want to know yours first because I think mine's higher.
Probably. Um, After rating this film, I think this is still the highest I have ever given on this podcast. I will say that. Okay. But just barely. My rating is an 8.3.
Really? I have
Yeah.
lower than you? What?
Whoa.
I give it an 8.25. I think that's the closest we've ever been in a rating before.
0.05. That's crazy.
By the end of the podcast, I'm just going to move it up to an 8.3 so I can be up there.
I
Uh,
reduce it by a whole point.
Dang it. I'm going to go after
uh,
you.
that's not how this works.
All right.
Okay. Um. Anyways, all right. So we talked about the opener. I think the opener sets the stage. But let's talk about Batman. You have him already introduced in this film from the beginning. As we already know, he previously existed in The Batman Begins, and so you kind of have that as a jumping point. How do you see that he's different in this film now that he's overcome some of those previous obstacles, and how is he contrasted by the characters in this film?
I think with Batman, there's a couple of things he's struggling with in this movie. Whereas in the first movie, his struggle was more to overcome himself, his fears. This movie has become, in a similar way, he's almost become his greatest enemy. And it's what he's trying to overcome in this movie. And I think it's a common theme actually throughout all three Batman movies, just in different ways. And in this movie, his struggle is that he's not the influence or the inspiration that he wanted to be. And you see that when he's breaking up the arms deal with Scarecrow, in that there are other Batmen that are
Mm-hmm.
there that are trying to make a difference like him, but they're doing so one in a very different way. They don't have the same rules as him. He has one rule, and this is brought up later in the movie too when Joker talks about it. It's his no killing rule,
Mm-hmm.
and it's the line in the sand that he's drawn for himself to stop him from going like just like becoming this unbridled
Mm-hmm.
um, vigilante. And
Right.
so these other Batmen, though, one, they're not as skilled. They're putting themselves in harm's danger. They're using guns. And Crane, as soon as he sees a gun, he goes, "It's not the Batman."
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so you can see this play out throughout the movie too. And this is kind of also coupled with the fact that he doesn't want to be Batman anymore. Um, and this is basically because of the very last moments of the first Batman movie when Rachel tells him that she'll wait for him until he doesn't have to be Batman anymore, when Gotham doesn't need him. And
Right.
so he doesn't want this mantle. He wants a normal life. He wants to be able to be with this girl. And so he's struggling throughout the movie to figure out a solution to this. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I think ultimately the solution that presents itself in this movie is it's not time for you to take off the hood. You've been trying to throw off this mantle this whole time when you needed to embrace it. Um, and I think it's an interesting struggle for him. I think this is honestly one of the places where I lost just not a ton of points, but some points. Because
Mm-hmm.
for me, I think honestly a lot of the focus of this movie gets put on the Joker and not so much on Batman.
Yeah.
Um,
I To a
go
certain
ahead.
degree, yes. Yes. You're right. Keep going. Keep going.
I think Batman still has like as a overall as a character, he's done well in this movie.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I think in terms of like the struggle he's facing, while it's interesting, it's not like a like when you're watching the movie, you're not thinking to yourself the whole time, "Oh wow, Batman's having a really hard time of this." Like
Mm-hmm.
he's just kind of Batman throughout most of the movie. if that makes sense.
Right. Well, yeah, it's not so much a internal struggle compared to the previous ones because there's a certain sense in which it's very clear what he wants, right? He doesn't want to be the Batman anymore. He's kind of prematurely become the old man in his career and decided that he wants to retire. And there's a sense in which the early stages of the film are him trying to pursue that and saying, "Oh, I have this opportunity to do that." And he's trying to do that. And then the situations at hand end up just thwarting that, so he can't do what he wants to do, right? Get out of the race. Oh, Harvey Dent is this new knight in shining armor. Let's have him be the hero that everyone wants. Oh, we have to turn ourselves in. At least I get to put down the mantle and be the person that Rachel says I need to be, right? All these different opportunities where he's like, it's time for me to let this go, right? Let this die. And yeah, and so the whole situation, it's not exactly the same type of struggle compared to the previous one, right? Where it's like, what is the question about revenge versus justice, right? And how do we draw that line and play that line well and not go into the darker side of this where we become doing this for revenge rather than doing what's right for the sake of doing what's right. In this one you have a lot more of that, just we know that he's there for justice, but how do you deal with that in this situation? So it's more, yeah, I thought in this movie it's not that he's not contrasted. The inner struggle is weaker, but also there's a sense in which he is maybe contrasted more by the other characters. And a lot more of this film deals with the contrast with justice come by other characters than necessarily the main character's inner struggle, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
But yeah, I mean, it took some points away from me here as well, but it still was pretty solid. I think it's not worth sneezing at because he definitely is still compelling, especially
yeah,
because of how he's pushed into the plot, right? The whole incentive is that first he's trying to break up the underground, the criminal underground, and then you start to see the Joker leaving his calling cards on masked up Batmen who were masquerading as Batman when they weren't really around town. He leaves his calling card and other people that he's blowing up or killing. And so he's forced into this situation to a certain degree, even as he's trying to get out of being Batman. He is demanded to be Batman by how the Joker's been dealing with this scenario. So it's not that he doesn't have a compelling reason to be there. It's just a lot less of an inner struggle for him personally because he knows what the Batman is. He knows who he is. He knows what his responsibilities are. And now it's just challenging that. How far is he willing to go? What is he willing to do? And what is he willing to sacrifice, really?
yeah.
I do think that it would be worth probably talking about Rachel Dawes at this point because she's pretty tied to the character arc that he does have in this film. Did you think that I know in the past she kind of represented, I believe it was like righteousness to a certain degree in the previous films. Did you have anything specifically on her and what she was her interactions with Batman or Harvey Dent and how she played into the film?
Honestly, I think Rachel functions more as ultimately, at least towards the later half of the movie, as a plot device to push the other characters forward with her death. But
Mm,
I think at the beginning of the movie, she function. I mean, she ultimately she functions as a drive. She functions as this element in both Harvey Dent and Batman's lives, and her loss is, I think, one of the themes of this movie. I actually, you said there's few themes. I think there's quite a few themes that come into this movie that I had written down. And one of those is how we ought to deal with loss,
mm,
because the way that Batman and Harvey Dent both deal with this loss are very different. And I think both of them are not exactly the healthiest ways to deal with it or healthy at all.
right.
But I think it's interesting. And early on in the movie, she functions as a drive for them to do what they do. Um, Batman is trying to take off his mantle. Harvey Dent is trying to clean up the city of Gotham, and she's right there with him.
she's got an idyllic righteousness that she's trying to push other people to pursue to make the city a better place, and she doesn't think that the way that Bruce Wayne is doing it is right, versus she thinks that the way that Harvey Dent is trying to do it is. And yeah, I think to a certain degree she might still represent that. You get that a lot less in this film, at the very least, compared to the previous one, but that's because she was a bigger part of the previous film.
Yeah.
I think that the fact that she is the driving motivation is the bigger thing. And when I
Yeah.
was saying that there's fewer themes, what I meant by that was not that there aren't themes in this film or there's not several themes, but the idea was that in the previous film, as we discussed in that last review, it's almost like every single character idealized something to some degree or
Oh,
another.
okay. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And in this one, there was a lot more I think contrast of, okay, like this is justice and this is chaos, right? Or the evil of the universe, and everything kind of played off of those two to a certain degree, uh, and developed those themes and unique ideas, right? Like Two Face really discusses a branch of that, for example. So there's different things where I think that was honestly better too, because there's almost so much going on in regards to the themes in the last one that you really have to sit there and think about each one individually to think about what the message is of Alfred and Legacy, or the message of Rachel, or the message of any number of characters. Versus in this one, you do see these two main ideas represented in Batman and Joker, and then you see everything else really developing those two and having different themes, but they're developed based off of that primary conflict. So I think it was tighter. I think it was better because it had a more cohesive baseline that it was coming from for everything else. Anyways, that aside, going back to Rachel, yeah, I think that she was a key linchpin to developing these other characters and developing those themes. So when the Joker, I know we kind of jumping around a little bit on this, so if you want to discuss something earlier, feel free. But when she dies, right, that's the big dark moment for Batman, because for him, there's a sense in which Rachel represents the future that he wants, right? That she is in some ways his ticket out of this life of being Batman. He gets rid of the mask and he marries Rachel and lives happily ever after. And when she dies, that's gone, right? And
Yeah.
that in some ways destroys everything he was hoping for in his life, and he has to now question everything. And that's where you see some really interesting things between the Joker and Batman, and we'll get to the Joker in a second. But when they're in the uh what do you call, the interrogation room with the Joker, and they start to have that discussion. You said he has like his one rule and all that stuff, and they start to have this interaction. There's a sense in which in that moment Batman starts to violate his own integrity, where he sees the Joker, and normally he's trying to stop the bad guy, right? He does what he can to stop criminal action, and then he moves on. He doesn't do anything excessive. And in that moment, you see him really start to rage against this man and to harm him because he can and because he's angry, rather than doing it to try to pursue justice. And that's exactly what the Joker wants, as he's leading him toward being that a darker version of himself. And so then you see that fully terminate when Rachel dies. And he has to question a lot of what he is. What was your thoughts on that arc and how they develop him? And then if you want to lean it into the end too, that's fine for
Who,
Batman's sake.
Batman specifically?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's interesting because Joker functions as this test for almost everybody in terms of like main or side characters throughout the movie. I think he functions as one for Batman, as one for Jim Gordon, as one for Harvey Dent. And as they're put up against these tests, it's the question of what is the nature of man. And this, I'm going to keep
Mm-hmm.
going back to this because this is ultimately the theme that's put forward in the movie as the biggest theme is man
Mm-hmm.
ultimately good or is he ultimately evil? And it's like the question of nature versus nurture. Is man made to be evil through circumstance or is he born that way? And circumstances will just, if the circumstances are right, he'll do something. And Joker even alludes to
Right.
this um, in the movie when he basically says people are good until the rules allow them. They're as good as the rules will permit them to be.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so there's this whole back and forth. And I think this instance is one where Batman is kind of being tested. And there's also, this is also a time to bring this up, is there's the dichotomy between Dent being the White Knight, Batman being the Dark Knight.
Mm-hmm.
And even though Batman is the Dark Knight, the one that no one really knows about, it is still his job, in a sense, his responsibility that he's taken upon himself to be the bigger man. Um, and so he has this moment of weakness where he rages,
Mm-hmm.
um, and he fights against, like, there's like an inner battle too, and you can see it when he's beating up Joker, and Joker's like lying on the floor laughing at him,
Mm-hmm.
um, and he's like, Joker like is getting beat up, and he says, "You're gonna have to break your one rule," and
Yeah.
he's just like,
Yeah.
"What's that?" Um, and this is one of the I have actually five scenes of dialogue that I really really like in this movie. Okay, the
Uh-huh.
dialogue was on point in this movie. Like
Right.
the script was amazing, and he's just like, "Why do you want to kill me? I don't want to kill you. I don't want to kill you. Go back to ripping off mob dealers." And it's just
Mm-hmm.
like Joker's whole drive in this movie, and we're gonna get into this way more when we talk about Joker, is just
Mm-hmm.
chaos. His goal in
Right.
this movie is just to prove to everyone that you're all not as good as you think you are. You're all just a bunch of
Mm-hmm.
sickos and wackos. And he even tells Batman, says, "See, I'm not a monster. I'm just ahead of the curve."
Mm-hmm.
Um, and like there's so many clever ways that Nolan like puts this, he keeps hammering away this theme, and it's the idea of show don't tell, where you don't even realize it unless you're sitting there watching it and thinking this through. But Joker, like every time he talks, it's always going back to, you're just as bad as I am. You just
Mm-hmm.
don't realize it yet. You just need a push. And he says it towards the end too. He says, um, insanity is like, or chaos is like gravity or something. He said, all you need is a little push.
Right.
And he's that push. That is his goal in life, is just to be that little spark that sets you off.
Mm-hmm.
And in that moment, Batman realizes that, and he's just like, "Oh shoot, crap! You're winning right now, even though you're getting
Right.
beat to a pulp on the floor." And then he gets the location to where Harvey Dent and Rachel Dawes are, and he leaves. Um, but no, I really like the scene, like the dialogue, the way the Joker um, is like basically telling him, "I'm winning," and without saying the
Mm-hmm.
words, and Batman realizing that. So
Right. Well, he's pushing him to the edge, and you see that previously where, I mean, just like you said in that dialogue, but you see that even in earlier scenes where everyone at the beginning, in some ways, idolizes the Batman, right? He is the good guy who saves the city. And within a few interactions, he has the whole city hostage and they're demanding that Batman turn himself in because he's now the bad guy. He's the one who's killing these people. And he's using that as a tool to show people that they're very quickly can be pushed to the edge. And that's what he's doing in that scene. And when Batman realizes it and he runs off to try to find them, right? He's really right at the edge to be pushed. And of course, when he goes to save Rachel, which was his primary goal, right? His idealized life in the future was contingent on him finding Rachel and stopping her from dying. And then the Joker had flipped it, and he actually saves Harvey Dent instead, and Rachel dies. And for him, that was just the crushing moment where he sees that the Joker has, in some ways, he almost broke him. And now he has to decide when he goes to confront the Joker again, will he go all the way or will he become the knight that he's supposed to be and stop evil without breaking his rule, right? And that's where you get that climactic scene at the end where they have the spy goggles thing, which I'm actually, it's like whatever, it's kind of weird. It felt a little out of place for the rest of the film, but it's fine. But overall, he goes in there and he stops the Joker, and then he almost dies, right? He pushes him off the edge, and he's falling to his death. And Batman, uh, what is it, ricochet or what is that called? A grappling hook, like captures the Joker from falling and dying, and strings him up and stops the evil of uh revenge that he could have had in that moment for the sake of doing what is right, which is catching this criminal.
yeah,
So, in the end, he does the right thing to a certain degree, but it draws into question everything that he's been doing at that same time, right? And how far he is willing to go. So pretty well done, I would say, especially in contrast with where he was trying to go with his life. Um, I think it does draw into question some of his motives, like where he was, like why, what he wanted in this movie, he never achieves. So there is
Yeah,
a sense in which his story goal, to a certain degree, never gets completed, but it definitely still furthers those themes that we're talking about in this film.
yeah.
Cool. What do you, so I know you want to talk about the Joker. I think I might as well just let you loose and go ahead.
See, my voice is a little sore right now. If it wasn't as sore, I would do my evil laugh because I really wanted to, but I can't. Ah, the pain. Okay, the Joker. All right, best part of this movie. All right, this
Uh
guy
huh.
is phenomenal. Okay, respect
Heath
to Heath
Ledger
Ledger.
was a legend. Yeah.
Yes, bro knew what he was doing. Um, where did he? We don't know. It's a sad turn of events, but point is,
It's interesting too, just as a side note, that Heath Ledger, when he first was announced as the cast for the Joker, there was a lot of criticism in the media that there's no way he was gonna, like, why are you choosing this guy to play the Joker?
yeah.
Turns out he was like the best option you could have chosen to play this character because he
Oh
just
yeah.
reinvented the Joker in a way that we had never seen before,
Oh yeah.
and it was very compelling.
And the thing is like the Joker is meant to be the embodiment of evil, if you will, the antithesis of good. He is meant to call into question all of your morals, everything you believe in, and drive you to the point of madness, because that's where he's at. He has given up all sense of morality, all sense of guidelines or rules, and even tells Batman, I need to look through my notes, at one point, like, the only way to live life is without any rules. Um, and so Heath Ledger just does this in such a way that's like phenomenal. Okay.
Uh huh. Uh
Um,
huh.
and so almost every point of dialogue that I like, I think every single one, except for the very last one, which is very brief, has the Joker in it. And it's Joker contrasting with someone else. Um, and the first one that comes up is the interrogation room. And we talked about this. But there's a couple of points of dialogue, and the reason I bring up the dialogue is because it helps flesh out his character. What's driving him?
Hmm.
What is his purpose in the movie? And so the first point of dialogue is in the interrogation room, and he basically says, um, "To them, you're a freak, just like me. They don't need you right now, but as soon as they don't, they'll cast you out like a leper. Their morals, their code, it's just a bad joke, dropped at the first sign of trouble. They're only as good as the world allows them to be. You'll see, I'll show you. When the chips are down, these civilized people, they'll eat each other. I'm not a monster, just ahead of the curve." And also, what I think is really interesting about this, and the reason I say we aren't really given an answer as to the nature of man, because Joker's whole thing is man's evil. Every single man has the most despicable, evil monster lying within them, just waiting to break free.
Hmm.
Is Joker's almost prophetic in here? Because when the chips are down, these civilized people do eat each other in the next movie, which is why I think it's so interesting how these movies tie into each other, and we don't see it in this
Hmm.
movie, but they do. Like that is ultimately what happens, and Joker ends up being right to a certain extent. And I think he is to a certain extent in this movie too. They're more. It's not like he's right. There are instances where we see his philosophy can be tested, and it's almost proven in a way, and it's
Hmm.
proven in later movies. Um, and Joker tells Batman, and this is his test of Batman, because he tests different characters. He tests him. He says the only sensible way to live in this world is without rules. Tonight, you're going to break your one rule, and that's when Batman leaves. That's when the dialogue ends, because Batman realizes, holy crap, he's right. He's pushing me over the edge. And so
Hmm.
it's almost like the devil is tempting him. And Batman is able to fight against this, and he's trying to prove his own philosophy that ultimately man is not evil, that there is a way for us to fight against this darkness, and it's within us. And so Batman is trying to prove his own philosophy against Joker's in this instance. Um, The second point of dialogue is the one with Joker and Harvey Dent in the hospital. And this one, I
That's a
think,
good one. Yeah.
I think is the best showcase for what drives the Joker. Um, and there's this short piece of dialogue. He says, "Do I really look like a guy with a plan? You know what I am? I'm a dog chasing cars. I wouldn't know what to do with one if I got it. I'm just doing things." And it's like this idea of he's just it's what makes him so formidable as a villain for Batman. Batman, with
Hmm.
all the villains in the last movie, was trying to figure out their motive. What is driving them? What is their end goal? Joker's
Hmm.
end goal is just a general idea of pushing people over the edge through the agent of chaos. And so,
Right.
as long
Well,
as
and
he's,
you see that
yeah,
earlier in the film with Alfred, where he's Bruce Wayne is trying to figure out what's going on. Like, what is this guy after? And Alfred gives him the poignant line where he says, "Some men just want to watch the world burn."
yeah,
And Bruce Wayne can't grasp that. He's like, that doesn't make any sense. And it
exactly,
comes to dealing with the Joker directly, where he realizes that that is the truth, that that is what he stands for. But
yeah,
anyways, keep going.
oh yeah, yeah. And so I think he also makes an interesting point. This is part of the Joker's dialogue. Because I think this is the second theme of the movie is like, and I'm not sure how to put this to like concise words, but it's like the idea that structure and organizations make us feel safe, and that people overall prefer safety to what is right, if you will, security, stability.
Hmm.
Um, and he says to Harvey Dent, "You know what I noticed? Nobody panics as long as things go according to plan, even if the plan is horrifying. If tomorrow I were to tell the press that a gangbanger will get shot or a truckload of soldiers will be blowing up, nobody panics because it's all part of the plan." Um, I don't want to get political, but I think it is interesting when you like talk about political assassinations, what's going on right now, and how like there are certain things where you can question the narrative, if you will. Was there someone behind the shooting of Trump? But as long as people are given an explanation, they're typically fine. They're satiated because there's a
Hmm.
reason. There's structure to it. Um, it's when there isn't a reason that's given that things start like there's panic. It's when people don't know what's going on. And like in those first few hours after Trump got shot at that rally was the panic. Like news sources, um, news agencies, people, everyone was scrambling. Like, what's going on? What just happened? And now that kind of there's like this narrative of, oh, this is what happened, everyone's kind of died down. It's calmed down. We know what happened. And so I think it is interesting because the Joker overall is he's wanting to cause chaos. And chaos doesn't necessarily need to be a physical chaos, it can be a mental one too. And so he's trying to cause Harvey Dent to question everything. And I think one of the reasons he does this, and we can talk about this when we get into Harvey Dent, because Harvey Dent's entire character is based upon structure, purpose,
Hmm.
organization.
Hmm.
Um, there's a method to his madness. Um, and Joker's purpose when it comes to Harvey Dent is to take away that structure and introduce that's what he says, um, introduce a little anarchy at the very end of their conversation. Um, and Harvey Dent fails ultimately. But I think this conversation shows what Joker's true motives are because in this instance the person fails the test. They
Hmm.
ultimately give in to this darkness, if you will. I don't know if you have anything to say on that scene specifically. Um,
You're talking about, well, Harvey Dent, I do think is worthy of discussing in his own right. So I will have things to say, but I'll
yeah,
wait till after we're done with our discussion on the Joker. So
yeah.
yeah.
Um, the other one is with Batman and Joker and the skyscraper. I think that this one kind of harkens back to the conversation they had earlier in the interrogation room when Joker
Hmm.
basically tells him people are gonna they're just waiting. There's just a beast inside of them waiting to come out.
Right.
And Batman asks him, "What are you trying to prove?" That deep down we're all as ugly as you. And that line right there, it's just so perfect because it's exactly what Joker's trying to do. Um, and Joker says, till their spirit breaks completely, until they find out what I did with the best of them. And that was his goal with Harvey Dent. And he says this in the movie. His goal is to show them that even the best of you can fall, and Harvey Dent did that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, and like I mean, this is why I say you don't. Nolan doesn't really give us an answer as to which person is right, because
Mm-hmm.
ultimately, to a certain degree, the Joker is right. And ultimately,
Mm-hmm.
Batman is right to an extent, and the people on those two boats proved that by throwing out, um, well, on the one boat, the inmate threw out what he thought was the detonator, and the second boat, they just couldn't go through with it. The thought of blowing up a boat full of people didn't sit right with them. And this whole idea of like pushing Dent to the edge, comes to like a head when they're in the abandoned building with Gordon and Harvey Dent and Batman. Um, and like Harvey Dent's whole idea is he thought he wants to bring about fairness and like structure. Actually, maybe I'm getting ahead of myself because Joker's not in this one. We'll wait till we talk about someone else. But yes, those are my thoughts on the Joker. The Joker is an agent of chaos who wants to prove that everyone deep down is just as evil as the next, and he does through chaos and calamity and breaking the structures and the organization that is around us that makes us feel secure, that puts us into this position where we are like, okay, this is what we are meant to do. But as soon as those rules and structures are stripped away, there's nothing holding us back from the unspeakable evils that we would commit.
It's interesting too, just in how the Joker acknowledges that his existence to a certain degree, which I think is interesting. I still don't fully know that I know the answer to this, but I think it's interesting how in their discussions, right? At first, he's trying to get the Batman to reveal himself, right? He says the Batman needs to turn himself in, otherwise more people die. And then he flips on that and he says, actually, no. If this accountant who knows who Batman is reveals him, he's dead. Also, basically, I don't care. I want him to live. And then you have that discussion with the Joker where Batman's like, why are you trying to do this? And he says, I don't want to kill you. You complete me, right? And I think that that's very telling for him as well. As a character, the Joker is into this chaos, and Batman is the one man in all of Gotham who can bring order out of the chaos of the world, right? Clearly, the justice system can't do it. Clearly, the criminal underworld can't even provide their own level of stability to the world for their own profit, right? All of this is Joker represents chaos, and he wants a balancing lever against him, someone to play the game. And that's what he's there for, right? Is to play this game of chaos and see how far he can push people. And for him, Batman is the antithesis of that, where he's trying to provide order in the midst of the chaos of Gotham. And so I think it's just interesting to see that the the way that the Joker represents himself is directly in contrast to Batman, and that's intentional. And there's a sense in which he acknowledges that if Batman didn't exist, he has no reason to exist himself. Like there's no purpose for him then.
Yeah. I think it's so interesting too because it's like Joker just sees himself as this spark, if you will. He sees himself as the
Mm-hmm.
push. He he acknowledges in all of his dialogue and everything he does that all of these problems they're already there. All he needs to do is just give everything just a little push over the edge. And when you're
Right.
talking about like he is the antithesis to Batman, Batman is the thing holding everything from going over the edge. That's what he sees Batman as. And so that's why
Mm-hmm.
he sees his presence as necessary because now it needs a push, whereas before it would have just done it on its own. But now Gotham
Mm-hmm.
has this guardian, this silent guardian, this dark knight that is holding everything together. And so now he needs someone to challenge him. He needs someone to meet him and push him over the edge, which also goes back to the whole question of like making Batman question whether or not he needs to be Batman. Because if he's not
Right.
Batman, does Joker exist? Um,
Right. That's a good point. Yeah.
and so is Batman the one creating these villains, bringing them up to challenge him? Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so yeah,
Yeah, I think isn't that discussed it's been a while since I've seen The Dark Knight Rises, but my impression was that that's actually a further developed in the next film, right?
Yes, this is a much bigger question that's brought up, like with Bane and the stuff that goes on in
Mm-hmm.
the third movie.
Right.
But yeah, no,
Yeah.
I think the Joker's character is amazing in his own right, but he also functions like, I wouldn't say beautifully because he's a pretty evil guy, but like
Yeah.
really, really well when it comes to his interactions with pretty much every other character he comes into contact with.
Mm-hmm. And I think that the reason it's called The Dark Knight, the reason this film is known for being such a dark film, is not just because he's an evil man doing evil things, right? But because specifically we're talking about someone who's bringing out the darkest parts of society,
Yeah,
right, and representing those to people. So it shows the wickedness that could be in all of us. So it's definitely an interesting philosophical discussion, and the Joker's the perfect character to do that for us.
yeah.
Let's talk about Harvey Dent, the White Knight.
All
Um,
right,
what is your thoughts on his beginning, his arc, his fall? I want to hear it all.
all right. I think Harvey Dent is meant to represent the everyday man. Um, and I think what's interesting is when you think about his character, there's nothing unique about him that sets him apart, really. He just happens to be elevated to this position where everyone sees him as being so much better than everyone else because he's willing to put these criminals away. Um, and what the Joker shows us is no, he's very much like all of you. He's very human. When we're talking about characters, and Harvey Dent, I guess, is more of a side character, but he's pretty prominent throughout the film. So he's in like
Mm-hmm.
that weird in between space, and he goes
Right.
very,
Well, for a good portion of the movie, he's pretty much one of two Batman's primary allies
yeah,
until the end. Right.
and he goes very quickly too from being the ally to the enemy.
Right.
Um, and so, like, I think when we're asking about characters, when you ask what drives these characters, and for Harvey Dent, it's the law. He has faith in the legal system that will allow him to bring all of these criminals to justice. And ultimately, what he comes to realize with the Joker is that system didn't work. And when he's talking to
Mm-hmm.
the Joker points that out. He says um, to him, he just says, I'm not a schemer. I try to show the schemers how pathetic their attempts to control things really are. It's the schemers that put you where you are. You were a schemer. You had plans, and look where that got you. And so
Mm-hmm.
Harvey Dent's character is one of structure and order, and it's another instance of the Joker stripping that away and asking that person, "What now? What are you going to do now that I've taken the order and the structure? Is there some greater good within you that's going to compel you to continue to do the right thing, or was it just this order and this structure that was compelling you to do the right thing because of its existence? And now that it's gone, what are you going to do about it?"
Mm-hmm.
And that's when Harvey Dent, now Two Face, is kind of pushed with this question of that's not fair. What is fair? And he says, the only thing that's fair is chaos. And he says, introduce a little anarchy, upset the established order, then everything becomes chaos. I'm an agent of chaos. Oh, and you know the thing about chaos? It's fair. And so that's where Harvey Dent takes his coin that used to be about making his own destiny. And it was
Mm-hmm.
the same sided coin. And his whole thing,
Mm-hmm.
and every time he talked to someone was, I make my own luck. Now he
Mm-hmm.
doesn't. He gave up on that. He gave
Mm-hmm.
up on the structure and trying to make his own way in life. And now everything is just chaos. Let it rain.
Mm-hmm.
Everything is a 50-50 chance now. Every person's life, we're going to flip a coin. And he just
Mm-hmm.
goes throughout Gotham, and when he finds a person, it's not even just I'm gonna kill you. It's, oh, you have a chance now. Are you gonna live or are you gonna die? Oh, looks like you're gonna live. Oh, your driver, guess not. Um,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and so I think Harvey Dent's character is the perfect example of someone who gets pushed over the edge and who was good because of the boundaries and the guidelines that they believed in. And when those guidelines and boundaries were shown to not do what he thought they would, he gives up on them. And he just devolves into an agent of chaos as well.
Yeah. Well, to a certain degree, I don't know that he I don't know that I agree that he represents the everyday man, but I think that he represents the idealized everyday man, maybe. For sure, like what everyone aspires to be at the beginning of their life, where they want to be the knight in shining armor who does the right thing all the time. Definitely, at the very least, that's the ideal of what everyone wants to be, and he definitely represents that, right? He is the best that Gotham could ever offer, or any city could ever offer, right? And to a certain degree, too, he's a very American man, right? Where he has the I make my own luck is a very American ideal where you go and you pull yourself up by your bootstraps and you say, I'm going to make this happen.
Yeah.
That is Harvey Dent, where he has, like you said, the coin that has two heads instead of heads and tails, so that no matter how he flips it, he always wins, right? And that's the idea, is that he can always make it work out the way he wants to if he puts in enough work and he's willing to have the grit and strength to do the right thing. And that's where he does things from pretending to be the Batman so that they can catch the Joker and whatnot, putting himself in harm's way for the sake of doing the right thing. He believes that if he does the right thing consistently and puts himself in ideal situations, he will come out on top. Now, that is what happens, that comes into question with
Yeah.
the Joker, where you had that dialogue, right, you talked about. And it's just, I think Harvey Dent is probably one of my favorite characters in this film. I don't know if I like him more than or appreciate the character more than the Joker or not, because I do think they're the two most interesting characters in this film.
Yeah.
But Harvey Dent definitely has a lot going for him, specifically because there's generally two ways where someone turns evil, right? You have that slow transition where over time they get eroded at until they become the evil that they had always been afraid of, right? That's the Anakin Skywalker arc, where he starts out as a good person, and then over time, these bad things happen in his life that slowly turn him closer and closer to the dark side until he becomes Darth Vader. Or you have someone like this, Harvey Dent, where he is idealized, he does everything the right way, and when his perfect ideal of how things should turn out is completely broken, right? Not just it didn't turn out right, but it actually flipped, right? And everything went wrong. His philosophy for the universe no longer works. He doesn't have a way to function. And that's where he's completely messed up, right? He's angry at Jim Gordon. He's angry at society. He's angry at Batman to a certain degree, where it's like everything's wrong. Nothing turned out how it was supposed to, and he doesn't know what to do with himself. And that's where the Joker steps into that and provides this alternative. How you've been living your life is completely wrong. It's not about making your own luck, because you can try your hardest and everything will still fail. It's because chaos is the only thing that provides a fair alternative. And
Yeah.
to a certain degree, that's where you have jaded people who have gone through bad experiences or feel like life isn't fair, and rather than uh, trying to figure a way out themselves and pick themselves up by their bootstraps, they do the alternative and riot or cause chaos in the world around them and say that there is no solution that's adequate in in a fair system because the system isn't fair, right? Um, so I think that he quickly turns to the antithesis of that, and that's why he's a scary villain, because exactly like you said in that dialogue, the Joker says that chaos is the only thing that's fair. And
Yeah.
that's where he has the coin. It's the same coin, but one side's now dirtied or rusted to some degree where it looks different. And that's where he has two different sides to the same coin, and that's what decides people's fate.
Yeah.
And in the film, there's a sense in which he's just as scary in certain scenes as the Joker, not because he's the same person, but because exactly what the Joker says, where people, when you have an idea of how things are supposed to turn out, everyone goes about their life normally. But when you don't know, that's when people lose their mind. And there's a sense in which you get that with Two-Face. He doesn't even know what he's going to do next because the coin decides, not him.
Yeah.
And so every single person, there's a sense in which there is an order to how Two-Face is doing it, but it's an order you can't predict. It's an order that you can't determine because it's all based on a random chance. And so his breaking to go completely opposite is very fascinating, very interesting. And because he's the idealized man and he falls so far, it's very telling about society, right? There's a sense in which all of us have seen to some degree or another great people that we idealized in society, where they were the epitome of a what you should act like, right? Or a great leader in your culture or organization or whatever it is, and they get caught in a scandal or whatever, and they fall so far in your eyes as they are not such the great man we idealized, right? And it's very telling to see how we react to that.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I mean, I pretty much agree with most of that. I think also what's interesting is you have a character who on the outset does such a 180 in terms of
Mm-hmm.
what is his purpose in this movie. But it's not done in such a way where it's a shock to you, where it's
Mm-hmm.
like to you it's like a the audience it's like, why is this happening? This doesn't make sense. Like it's done in a very seamless way where it's
Mm-hmm.
believable, and I think Rachel's death plays into this like really really well. Um,
Mm-hmm.
sorry, Rachel, but your greatest contribution to this movie was dying. Um, um, and like it just it takes his whole world and it just flips around its head, and it's basically like he's like, ah, well, what I tried before didn't work. Might as well try something else. Yeah, I think it's like he didn't expect to be confronted with such difficulty in Gotham when always trying to do what's right.
Which also contrasts it with the themes of the film, where it's like, what is just, what is right, well, what is fair, really,
Yeah,
and he starts to talk about fairness in a completely different way once he breaks. It's like, what is right is that he wants revenge, but revenge and all of this comes at chance. It's not based off of pursuing righteousness. Righteousness doesn't work.
yeah,
It's the chaos of the world that determines whether or not righteousness is carried out. So
yeah.
yeah.
So
Anyways, I didn't want to break up your thought process too much. I
no,
just thought that was worth noting.
you're good. I mean,
Cool.
I think I've covered as much about Harvey Dent as I wanted to.
Cool. Um, you want to talk about Jim Gordon briefly?
In my notes, I have Jim Gordon, Alfred, and Lucius Fox written down. I'll get Alfred out of the
Sure.
way because I don't think Alfred does a ton in this movie as opposed to the
No,
last one.
no.
He kind of takes a back
Hmm.
seat, and Jim Gordon kind of gets pushed to the forefront. Um, Lucius Fox doesn't do a ton till the later end of the movie with the whole sonar thing, and I do want to talk about that a little bit because I do think it fits into the themes of the movie in an interesting way. But with Jim
Okay.
Gordon, I think what's really interesting is that he is another character that the Joker tries to like flip his world on its head. And you
Hmm.
have these interactions, and it's very interesting because I didn't pick up on it at first. It took me like 4.5 hours to get through this movie because I had to keep sitting there and thinking about stuff. And I'm writing notes, okay? For those of you listening, I've never written so many notes on any of the movies we've done. Um,
Nice.
Jim Gordon's character throughout the movie at first is presented as just this up and coming detective. Um, he is just doing his job. He's going to start working in like working with Harvey Dent, and like at a certain point, Harvey keeps asking him, "How do you know you can trust your men? Can you trust them? Can you trust them?"
Hmm.
And Jim Gordon keeps brushing it off. Like his whole goal in life, his desire was to bring the criminal underworld to justice. That's what he's driven by. And the flaw in Jim Gordon is that in his desire to do this, he ignores the fact that it's not just the criminal underworld that's corrupt, it's his own police department. And it blinds him to this.
Hmm.
And so the Joker, the Two-Face more, kind of brings this to a forefront. And he asks him, like, who did you let drive Rachel Dawes? Um, like, who are you trusting that you shouldn't be?
Hmm.
And like Jim Gordon's whole world gets called into question when the question is, who can I trust? Who is a
Hmm.
trustworthy person in this world? Um,
Right.
and this kind of comes to a head towards the end when Harvey Dent and Gordon and Batman are all in a room, and Dent says, "It's not about what I want, it's about what's fair. You thought we could be decent men in an indecent world. You thought the rules could be bent but not break. You were wrong. The world is cruel, and the only morality in a cruel world is chance, unbiased, unprejudiced, fair." Um, and Gordon's character is like pushing back against this. And it's in a different way than
Mm-hmm.
Batman does too, because Gordon's character doesn't push back by breaking his rule. Gordon pushes back by leaning into his morals. He leans
Mm-hmm.
into, no, this is what I know is right, and this is what I know is
Mm-hmm.
what I'm supposed to do in this world, even absent these rules. The rules are just
Mm-hmm.
there for evil men like the Joker. But good men know what's right no matter what. And
Mm-hmm.
so, and then Batman says, nothing fair ever came out of the barrel of a gun. Um, and there's like this whole dialogue, um, and like that goes back to Harvey Dent's character of like, why did the Joker choose to mess with him the most? But I think Gordon's character functions interestingly here. He doesn't do a ton compared to like Dent or Joker or Batman, but thought it was worth mentioning.
Yeah, no, and I think that you're absolutely right. As a side, I just also want to say that one of the great things about this film is the villain monologues make sense
Yes.
in that the Joker, it's part of his personality, right? They're trying to question him, they're trying to get information out of him, and instead he decides to go on a monologue about what's right in society, what does chaos mean, and he's in some ways ignoring the questions that he's being asked. And
Yes.
also crazy that every time he just loves to talk about his scars, and every time he's talking about them, he tells a different
Yes.
story. That was always interesting. I love that little side bit. But you saw with Jim Gordon in the first film, to a certain degree, he represented integrity, right? But
Yeah.
in that movie, he pretty much was only responsible for himself.
Yes.
In this film, he's taken on the responsibility of lieutenant and then commissioner for the city of Gotham, and that gives him responsibility not just for himself but for his entire department. And going back to what you were saying earlier, to a certain degree, he doesn't want to acknowledge the fact that there might be something wrong with his department, not just because it's not good for the department and it means that he might not be able to carry out justice like he wants to, but beyond that, that reflects on him as their leader because he is responsible for the people below him, and his integrity is called into question when the people below him are not doing the right thing. So that's what comes to a head with Harvey Dent at the end of the film, where he's saying, "You did wrong. It is your fault." And Jim Gordon has to acknowledge that, yeah, he is responsible for the people below him, and it is his fault that these people, that Rachel died, that Harvey Dent was taken into custody and burned half to death, right? That all of these things occurred, he in some regards is responsible for it, even though he didn't actually carry out any of the evil things, that he acted in his own way with as much integrity as he thought he could. He still is responsible for the outcome. And so that's in regard to his heart arc, a hard thing for him to swallow, and trying to deal with the consequences of maybe losing his family to Harvey Dent as he threatens to kill them,
Yeah.
right? And the chance of society causing chaos in his life.
Yeah. And
So yeah, go ahead.
and that's when Batman says like, you're fooling yourself if you think you're letting chance decide. You're the one pointing the gun,
Mm-hmm.
Harvey, so point it at the people responsible for what happened. Point it at me, point it at you, and point it at Gordon. And that's when he's like,
Mm-hmm.
okay. And so
Yeah.
he flips the coin for each person. He shoots Batman, he lives, and then before he can do anything, Batman takes him out. Um, which I
Mm-hmm.
think is interesting because Joker says, tonight you will break your one rule, which is no killing. And he does. He breaks the rule when he kills Harvey Dent. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and you could argue like he was weak, he was just trying to knock him out of the way, but in a sense, Batman does break his one rule. He kills someone. He kills Harvey Dent. And so in a way, Batman gets pushed over the line, and it kind of it goes to the whole like Joker broke Batman when he killed Rachel, just like he broke
Mm-hmm.
Harvey Dent. He broke them in very different ways, even though what's interesting is that even though Batman breaks his one rule, it doesn't derail him like it does Harvey Dent, which goes to further
Mm-hmm.
prove his inner thesis, if you will, that men are inherently good or they have good within them. And so
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I think it just goes back. There's just this push and pull throughout the whole movie that's making you question: is the man inherently good or is he inherently evil, or is there a mixture of something in between? Um,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, no, I think Gordon was
And
great
that,
for the side character that he was.
yeah, and that fully terminates the idea that you have discussed throughout the film, where you either die a hero or you live long enough to become a villain. And you see that contrasted in both of these characters at the same time, right? They cover up Harvey's turn to evil and show him as a hero, right? He dies a martyr versus Batman lives long enough to become a villain. And in that moment, when he does break that rule, he truly, in some ways, has become not what he represented to be or not what he was trying to be.
Yeah,
So it's definitely a an interesting contrast. And I think now that we've had the discussion, I do agree to a certain sense that you don't get a full answer to what Joker was asking, like what the morality of man and his yeah, what he stands for and what he can do and all that. Um yeah, it's interesting.
yeah, and it's like that's why the very end of the movie is so key. And this is probably one of it's like either first or second in there for the dialogue. Like the way they finish the movie is phenomenal, and you have this
Mhm.
whole we're going to cover up what Harvey Dent did because without this, Joker wins, and Joker can't win. We cannot let him win because if he does, the city's plunged into chaos. Everything we fought for, everything Rachel died for, is all for nothing. Everything Batman has been fighting for the past how many years is all for nothing. Um, and so Batman repeats the line that got brought up at the beginning of the movie: either die a hero or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain. And he's acknowledging the
Mhm.
fact that I have to be the person who lives long enough to become the villain. I have to be this
Mhm.
person that Gotham can blame. There has to be a scapegoat for this, and I'm going to be that
Yeah.
person. Um, there was one line he said, and I'm not sure how this sits with me, and I've been kind of trying to figure out how I feel about this, where Batman says, because sometimes the truth isn't good enough. Sometimes people deserve more. And I'm sitting here going, what was Nolan trying to get at with this? Because what does that mean? What do you mean you need more than the truth? I don't know. Like, I don't know. This is like the
Yeah,
inner monologue dialogue in me is going whack right now.
right. Well, I think that even goes back to a movie that says to some degree the same question to in a lighter tone is Miracle on 34th Street, which is all about uh Kris Kringle, Santa Claus on trial, and whether or not there's that epitome in that movie where he goes, what's better, a truth that sheds a tear or a lie that brings a smile, right? And that's the same kind of idea of, you basically don't have the whole truth available to people because it's society is better for it. And that's the question that you're left with in in this film to a certain degree and how they end it. So
Yeah,
to a certain degree, it's presented that the Joker didn't win, but in some ways he achieved the goals that he was looking for, at least in Harvey Dent. To a certain degree, not so much with society. To a certain degree, with Batman, yes. So yeah, it's a mixed bag, and that questions that it leaves you are further developed in the next film. So it's not like you have it fully resolved at this point, anyways. But it's definitely very thought provoking.
I think also as a side note, um, there's this very interesting line, and it's not like quite a theme that's flushed out in the movie, but Gordon says to Batman when they're looking at Harvey's corpse, like, whatever chance you gave us of fixing our city dies with Harvey. We bet it all on him. And it's like this lesson that we ought not to put our entire hope of fixing like the problems of the world in one man. Because all it takes is that
That's
one
good.
man messing up. And so
Hmm.
it's this idea that like one man isn't going to solve this problem. there needs to be a lot of people working together here because when you put our hope in one man, it allows, and this is the rest of the line, the Joker took the best of us and tore him down. I don't know. I thought that was just an interesting side note of like
Yeah,
when you put your faith in one person, you're basically putting all your chips on the table. And if that one person messes up, then everything's for naught.
right. And you see that in cults and other things where they do put their faith in one person, and when it all falls apart, you have things where they drink the Kool-Aid, right? So
Yeah.
it's definitely it's a lot of these ideas aren't just poignant because they're interesting philosophical things, but to some degree or another, we have seen them actually play out in society in one form or another in different actual historic events. So it's very it's excellent. It's a very fascinating movie, and
Yeah.
there's a lot to be analyzed in it for a reason, and that's what you got today. So in regards to the future
Oh, hold on, hold on,
impact
hold
of this
on. We,
film,
we didn't talk about
all
Lucius Fox yet. We didn't talk
right, all
about
right,
the
all right.
sonar thing.
You're fair, fair.
Okay.
Okay,
We don't have to spend a
go
ton of
ahead.
time on this. I just thought it was very interesting because it's almost like a completely different realm. And it's the question
Mm-hmm,
of Batman pushing the lines. And Lucius Fox, I think, represents morality and doing what's right in this movie, no matter what. And
mm-hmm,
when Batman takes his sonar equipment and basically makes it an intrusion on every single person's privacy in Gotham, um, Lucius kind of was just like, this is wrong in so many ways. Dang it, where did I write this down? Where is it? Ah, here we go. He says, um, Batman says it's beautiful, and he goes, beautiful, unethical, dangerous. This is wrong. And Batman's like,
mm-hmm,
I've got to find this man. And Lucius says, at what cost? What
mm-hmm,
what is the cost here? And it goes back to the idea of what is man without the guidelines and the restrictions of society, of the law?
mm-hmm,
Um,
mm-hmm.
and Lucius is basically saying no man ought to have this power. I think he does say that almost verbatim.
Yeah, he
Um,
does. Yeah,
and Batman's like, we need this to defeat Joker. And there's a little something there where it's kind of ends up being a little bit of a plot device, but I think it functions in such a way that the plot device even plays into the themes of the movie, which is, are men capable of still doing the right thing even when society's restraints aren't being pressed upon them? And Lucius is another example of someone who's able to do the right thing by destroying it as soon as he's done using it to find the Joker.
right. And it just goes to show the power creep that had slowly occurred for Batman, where he had originally started as this person who did the right thing and stopped bad guys, and he was a vigilante that was almost just above the police, right? Where he didn't, the police couldn't get it done, so he did, and he left the rest, the prosecution and whatnot, to them to figure out. And at this point, you see that he's gotten so powerful with the technology that he has. There's a sense in which he's, and you even get this in other scenes in the movie, but he's barely different from a villain. And that's where the one rule becomes important, because the one rule is what separates him from the villains out there. Is he willing
Yeah,
to kill people when he's willing to do all these other things that no one should be allowed to do? It's not legal, it's not ethical, and he's doing it for the sake of achieving these ends. And as long as he's not killing people, I guess he's doing the right thing. But then that one rule becomes super important. So, and that's what Lucius is doing. He's becoming a check on him, saying, "Hey, you've gotten out of hand on this,
yeah.
and this is not right."
I think it's so interesting too because that question is asked throughout the movie. When he like
Mm-hmm.
strings up those wannabe Batman, they say, "What's the difference between you and me?" And he answers with it, "I'm not wearing hockey pads." But like the question is
Mm-hmm.
still there. Like, why can't we do what you're doing? What is the difference here?
Right.
And the difference is they were willing to kill people. And like Batman didn't
Right.
articulate that, but it's there. Um, and like they're yeah. Anyways, there's so much that I could talk about in my notes, but we can we can move on.
Sure. Well, I'm just thinking about moving forward with the film. It's obviously had an impact, right? It's literally in the National Film Registry. So
Yeah,
there's a lot of people that think very highly of this film. What do you think the continuing impact of this film will be?
I think this film defined who the Joker ought to be. Like, I don't think anyone's ever going to top Heath Ledger's performance in this movie. Um, it's quite a legacy, by the way, to go down in history as the greatest Joker of all time, basically. Um,
Mm-hmm.
it's a sad story what happened with him, but I think it's really interesting too because it plays into the themes of the movie, but in a way that gets put into real life. It like materializes it for the audience because Heath Ledger was method acting. He had a journal where he kept note of everything he was thinking, and like they have his journal. You can look up like different snippets of it, and like it got to the point where this character had become such a part of him that it scared him. Like this is just totally wicked and depraved and evil, and he like couldn't get out of it, and it's what cost him to take his own life. Um, and I think often people will watch. This is one of the things about movies that I think is often overlooked, and it goes into the impact of the movie. And I think impacts of movies can be lost because we don't go into the movie asking, what are the themes? What are we supposed to take away from this movie? Instead, we're watching the movie purely for entertainment. And so people will go into this movie and go, ah, yes, the Joker, he's so cool and evil. And ah, yes, Batman, he's awesome. He has so many gadgets. And ah, yes, oh man, his girlfriend died. Wow, that's sad. Why did she have to die? And not think about it other than that. Um, and the thing is like the impact of this movie is one, I think it changes the way that we see the Joker and the way that we see Batman, and we talked about this in the last Batman movie. Um, but I think also the impact. The question is there an impact, and ought there to be one? Is the question that I'm asking when this comes up.
And I think that some of it does come from um, the impact from people who were part of the film, but also from the storytelling of the film itself to the to the questions that it poses about society, things that we continually question about what is right, what happens in society, and the questions in this film are questions that I think to some degree or another all of us wonder about and question for society as a whole for sure. Um, yeah, I think it's very poignant. The messages. I think that it's definitely, even though it's in some ways an uncomfortable film, especially because it poses some hard questions and doesn't necessarily answer them fully. I think it is valuable because it is something that all of us do need to think about, right? About the depravity of mankind and how far we're willing to go as a society or even individuals, how dark it can get. And to some degree, those ideas are posed in even ancillary films in this universe of the DC, where I know that, for example, the Joker film or the new Batman film aren't specifically tied to the Christopher Nolan Batman trilogy, right? But in some ways, they further the ideas that are demonstrated in this film, where, okay, you have one man, for example, in the Joker film, where he is just a normal guy, but how far can his depravity go where he becomes a villain, right? And that's what that film explores, and how any man can become evil if they're led down this slow path of darkness. Or, for example, in the new Batman film, and just how dark it is, and the ideas presented by the Riddler and the new whatever his name is, the new Batman. Anyways, so like, there's definitely I can't think of his name right
Robert
now. I don't know
Pattinson.
why, because he's Pattinson. Yeah, there we go. Anyways, I think that there is a lasting impact, not just in how the films are being made today, but in the questions that are being posed, and in an understanding of the, if not for any number of things, whether it's your religious beliefs or the cultural societal expectations in place, if not for those things, we could become a villain in our own lives, and how we combat the darkness inside of us, right? So I think that it's a poignant message. I think it's valuable for people to wrestle with, even if it is a dark theme, and that I think there is a lot to be said for how this movie contributed to society. So, yeah,
Yeah,
based off of all of that discussion, would you change your rating?
I'm just gonna move it to an 8.3.
The only thing I would say is it actually probably deserves an 8.5 from me, specifically because as I was thinking, one of the things I took points away from was the revelations, and I said it somewhat had revelations, but honestly, there is a pretty big revelation in this film, and it's that the Joker did want to be caught, and that changes everything for what happens immediately after that. As it flips from Batman being in control to a 180 of the Joker being in control, and everyone going into chaos again, right?
Yeah,
Plunging back into that darkness. So I did take a couple points away that I gave back to it at that, so that's probably where it deserves it. And honestly, that's the highest rating that a movie's gotten in this. So it's a solid film. I enjoy watching it. I think it's very thought provoking. Christopher Nolan's my boy, so we're probably gonna see more of that in the pod coming up. But for now, that is the pod. We hope you all enjoyed. If you like this, give us a little follow, thumbs up, like, and subscribe, all that stuff. Whatever. If you like it a lot, please share this with someone. We're just asking for the love of the people who actually enjoy this. If you don't, whatever. We don't care. But we do appreciate it if you genuinely do share this with someone. And that's it. We're back next week, as we always are. See you all then.